everyone.
Thanks.
It's 9:33. I think we've gotten all our stragglers. Sorry about the room change.
I think it confused us more than it confused
It
everybody else.
I was up there like, what's going on? I usually have Mike and Brian in there, so.
Well, the guards flag you down.
Yeah.
So Spring was halfway up the steps and they're yelling at me, tag, 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 tag. I said, yeah, what?
All right, well, we'll go ahead and call the Technical Advisory Committee for McHenry County for May 13th to order. And we'll go ahead and proceed with roll call. Steve Bicking.
Here.
Mike Von Bergen, Chris Dom, not present. I think the farmers are all out today. Al Schmidt,
Yes.
Mike Warner,
Here.
Jody McCarthy had an emergency, she will not be present. Brian Valesky,
Here.
Bruce Meyer and Dan Volkers, not present. Lori Ryan,
Here.
Dan Ziller and Seth Demish, not present. Scott? Here, Jack. Spring Duffy?
Here.
Ernest Varga? Here. Darren Olson, did I see Darren? No, no Darren. No Andrea. Brad Andresen?
Here.
Tyler Wilkie and Cody Book. I think they're part of that farming community, not present, so we have 6, 7, 8. Okay, so we have a quorum.
We don't.
All right.
I need to leave at 10:20.
Still quorum, Steve.
Right.
Don't kill us, no.
I mean, just if there's voting or something later.
I don't,
know.
There's no.
that's a fair point. I don't know if we need to vote on something, we'll probably just table it till next time.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything on here. I think everything,
Was all
we'll see. I hope we don't have to spend too much time. Maybe we can jump around. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and jump to item number 2 on the agenda for minutes approval from our last meeting on March 18th.
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, we have motion to approve by Ernest. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Second by Brad. Any discussion? I hear none. We'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor to approve the minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, public comment, I don't think we have any. Don't see any members of the public. Any members' comments today, this morning? Anything on anyone's mind? Okay, good to see you all. Okay, well, so we'll jump into our discussion items here in our old business, item number 5. I think considering Steve's availability, what I'd like to do is I think item number 5.2, the bulletin 76 rainfall data was really a discussion component. So maybe we'll have that one, because I think that one potentially could lead to a vote depending on what we want to do with it. I did not include it in your packet because it's very long, so I'm going to pull it up on the screen. But it was brought forward just to discuss as a committee whether or not, or how we want to approach it, or just kind of open it up for discussion. So let me pull that up here for you all. Maybe I'll introduce it. Has anyone not familiar with it? Has everyone seen it? Most of you have seen it? So I even had it up before. So essentially, and I've looked at it myself, I'm not as familiar maybe as some of you, but what I took away was this was basically, so it goes through the whole process, right? We're all pretty familiar with that, but I think what they did here was they basically threw out at us a 2050 anticipated rainfall number, 2075. So here's the data for 2050. Hey, Tyler.
Morning.
Sorry, not Tyler. Please. Tyler, we're on item 5.2, jumping around a little bit, but we're discussing the bulletin 76 rainfall data. So they do a 2050 for all the regions. They do a 2075 here forecast, and then all the way up to the year 2100, I believe. Yeah. So I don't know that we do anything right now, but up for discussion. I'll pull up the 2050 just so we have it. Northeast. There we go. So 24-hour, 100-year, I think we're around 8.5. So by 2050, about another ½ inch. So I don't know if there's any discussion or just kind of acknowledge the data, it exists, and as we get closer to that, then, you know, we can make a decision whether or not we update this, or maybe even the State Water Survey might update their numbers potentially.
What are you proposing to update? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm not, it was, one of the members brought it up like, hey, there's new Bulletin 76 rainfall data, maybe we should discuss it in TAC. So that's what this was just to bring it up, acknowledge it if anyone's not familiar with it. Damn.
You fooled me.
Were you upstairs?
Yeah, I went upstairs and where is everybody?
We try to get all this
Must have
trash
passed right by
so-
each other. I did a sweep before we started.
I thought my farming community folks would actually not be present, but.
Hey,
I gotta
I'm not a
call
farmer, so that.
Wow. So I said community.
We're still praying for rain.
So another comment I have with regard to this is Lake County's already accepted it for a year and a half, not 2.5 years, the new data.
This new
And
data.
a lot of communities in Lake County have already adopted it.
This is Bulletin 76.
This is 76.
What was the one before that?
75.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
I'm just behind the
This
times.
is not
Everybody else is adopting it. Why are we doing it?
Right, so 75 is adopted, it is updated in the SMO. The only thing we don't have updated, which we've approved already, is our appendix for that impervious pervious chart that you can use. Most of the engineers and consultants are already using that and advising people to use that. So this is the newest data, if you will, and what they're trying to do is project out to these future years of 2050, 2075, and 2100. So I don't think there's anything for us to necessarily do, but that's why we wanted to just open it up for discussion and have everybody be familiar with it. I think, as I mentioned, the 100-year, 24-hour event is
Almost 9 inches.
8.9. So almost 9, we're at about 8.5 right now for the newest data. So in about 25 years, that's what they're projecting as of right now. In 10 years, who knows, that might change.
One of the reasons I've heard people relying on this is a lot of the infrastructure that we're putting in today is still going to be in place in the future. And so that may be one reason to take this into consideration, at least with certain types of projects. But I'm not aware of any county adopting this at this point. I don't know if anybody else is, in your various capacities, has been using this or has been with counties or other organizations that have adopted it.
No, and I think there's also a chart in here with the percentage increase.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah, a little bit further down.
Oh, further down. I'll try to find that. Yeah, I think this is obviously a good planning tool for any future municipalities. I don't know that we would require it as part of the ordinance, but if any of our communities.
Newmont is probably
Pretty far down?
pretty far down.
All right, well, I'm not gonna hunt it. You guys get the, or do you want me to hunt it?
I think it's, I can't remember, 5, there it is. Or wait, that's 2075.
All right.
So you go up, it's like 4%, roughly.
Well, those are factors.
Those are the
Difference from-
multiplication factor from Bulletin 75 to the
Okay.
new rainfall data.
So I think if any municipalities did want to use it or communities for planning purposes, certainly they could. It would go above and beyond what we have set, and that's obviously allowed. So,
I checked with Perry at IDOT District 1, the hydraulics section chief, and they're discussing it, but they haven't made any decisions yet. And I think that would be, you know, like pointed out, with infrastructure needs in the future, if you want to plan for it or not plan for it, whether it's used, I guess.
Okay. Well, I think maybe that's where we leave it if there's no other discussion on the topic. Okay. There are none, so we'll just, it's there, it's available, so everyone is aware. And it will be a nice planning tool.
Can I ask one?
Yes, sure.
If a project, and I'm asking this DOT related, would it be advisory or on board to start having our consultants utilize 76 on the anticipation that we're going to be adopting this? 'Cause here's our problem. A bridge is like a 5-year project. It's not, here I get a permit, I'm done, I'm finished. So I don't want our guys to go down the road, we utilize 75, we're all good and happy, and all of a sudden we start construction and you guys turn around and go, wait a minute, you're not meeting 76. So I'm a little leery on the leave it out there theory.
I think the point is that the SMO allows for more restrictive approach. And therefore, if an entity wanted to use this, it would still be acceptable within the SMO. But,
Understood. The only thing I have is, if we go through phase 1 using 75, and all of a sudden we hit phase 2, we're in design, and someone goes, nope, we just adopted 76, it's gonna, time out. Can we be grandfathered or something?
I'll put it this way, I think you'd be one of the first people to know if there's a change in where you're at in the permitting process. And I think I don't think, if you're in the permitting process and we know that, I don't think we would all of a sudden try to shift it on you. And that's just in general for any permit submittals that we get, it's under the current ordinance. We just had that with our wetland restoration fund, right? The request came in before we made the changes, so we held the old costs for those folks. It would be a similar type of situation, and I think if we knew it was coming down the pipeline, I think that's where, as part of that review, we might let you know that it's coming, and you can make that decision with DOT if you guys wanted to.
And when I go back to report, using what Scott had just said, if the powers that be say, that's it, we're switching to 76, it's okay, because according to what Scott just said, you can use the more stringent. Okay.
Yes, you can. I think you just, it depends if you're applying 76 standards to like the 0.1 foot, change to the high water level, let's say, type of considerations, because we would only want to make sure that the Bulletin 75 flows meet that 0.1. So if you're, that obviously is easier. It depends, I guess it depends how you use the data. If you're gonna say, I'm gonna replace Bulletin 75 with 76 and still meet, the 0.1 change in height and all of that, obviously it makes it an easy review. If you're using it for, in whatever, in some different fashion for one specific component or aspect, then just be mindful of that, I suppose.
Thank you.
I don't think you would, but I'm just, let's cross that bridge when we get there. But I think you would know, I'm sitting on
I'm a
this.
warrior and a conspiracy theorist from the day go, so.
we were kind of expecting you to be the driver for adoption, Ernest.
All right. With that, I'll go ahead and close the discussion for 5.2, seeing as we're not going to take any action on it. We'll move back to 5.1. Let me pull it up on the screen behind me for you guys. There are some extra packets. If you need it, please feel free to grab one. If not, it's up here on the screen. So this was what we talked about, where I had pulled up, and I can pull up the last agenda, had kind of shown what impervious increases, due to the flow, and we talked about that long flow path. So just as a refresher, and I can pull some of that back up if needed, just let me know. And the discussion of, or some of the concerns that potentially like, hey, this could lead to some engineer manipulation to the numbers to get it to say what we want, right? So I'll get into that, but that was kind of where we ended things. So this isn't, a lot of these red lines that I have in here, I wish I had a little bit more time, but we're trying to kind of get something going so that we can get some discussion on it. But this is a potential way of revising the rate, runoff rate reduction, which ties into the detention requirements. So we thought that there was, or in our last discussion, there was very little difference between the 10% and 5%. We talked about how this wasn't actually a conservation easement, and the most important thing is having that analysis to confirm that there's going to be no downstream issues. So whether you're going to a 5% or a 10%, if there's no issues, right? So to simplify it, because it seems like this was also driving a lot of headaches, we could look to remove that 5%, go to a straight 10% number, and probably one thing that I forgot to modify was this 1 acre or less of new impervious is created. So this would just be any new impervious area up to 10%. So I do apologize about that. So if you guys want to mark that in your packet, this is meant to allow you to just go up to 10% as long as you demonstrate that the existing conditions peak runoff rate has not increased and the existing conditions drainage patterns have not changed, meaning that it's not going from sheet flow to a concentrated flow, or you're taking potentially 100 acres and concentrating it to one location, as well as that there is something downstream that can handle that, right, without creating an issue. So that's the intent behind it. So if you can meet that, show that. Originally, it just said demonstrating that shall not result in flood damage, which I thought, let's actually, like, what are you gonna need to show for a review, right? What is the presentation to be made? So let me just run through this. I'm sure you guys are gonna have a lot of comments. So that was kind of the first change. The other change was working off the idea of, again, that longer flow path. And I had a hard time with this because it was talking about release rates and allowable release rates. So what I tried to do was indicate first that the release rate from the development site, this is something that we talked about, to be based off the new impervious area or any other hydraulically disturbed areas that are cleared, excluding areas intended for ecological restoration. So if it's going to stay vegetated and it's remaining vegetated, then that wouldn't be part of that calculation. Obviously, new impervious areas are that change. If it's a forested area and you're clearing that and you're going to propose grass, obviously that's a change. We'd like to see that accounted for. And so that would work straight into that 0.15, 0.04. I didn't change these. We could look to modify that. So that's calculating the release rate for the development. Then when you do the allowable release rate from the property, again, you're using the 0.04, 0.15. I took the exceed lesser of, because I couldn't think of any maybe you guys can. I couldn't think of any situations where I would not always be less. So I took that out and said meet either of the following, and really the big one is number 3, is demonstrating, again, tying back to that existing peak and having that the tributary area based from the point of leaving the site to the upstream limits of the development site. So I did put here in update appendix 5. The reason I did that was because appendix 5 describes a lot of the methodologies and calculations. So unfortunately I didn't include the second page here, which was my bad, I meant to do that. But it continues where number 1, number 2, number 3 kind of describes rational method, all of that. So the reason what we can do is we also got the this runoff computation from NRCS, which you can plug in the watershed, the hydraulic length, runoff curve number, average watershed slope. Okay, this is an easy job. We haven't vetted this or looked into it, so I'm not familiar with this EFH2 method. But you can kind of get the idea. You plug in your rainfall, you get a Q, so you can do an existing versus proposed. We can develop a similar spreadsheet, and what we can do in the appendix is we can list, what curve numbers we would want people to use so that people can't try to manipulate the curve number in order to essentially try to show like, hey, I'm below the existing or whatever it is. The NRCS is following straight tier 55 curve numbers, and as you guys know, that table is very extensive. There's a lot to choose from. So if we wanted to, we could make it real simple and easy, have impervious, pervious, or at least several different situations for pervious, taking natives into account, so that when people show their proposed versus existing, if they are doing some kind of restoration, they'll get the benefit of that, showing that they're making the situation better. But thanks to Sprig's help, we were able to get this information, and then this can be used as part of this rational method. So now we can have an actual spreadsheet that can be consistent, where the engineers can use it, anybody else can use it to potentially, show this. One of the items that we probably want to consider is that if it's an engineer, then obviously it's going to come stamped, and there's no questions there. They have their PE. If it's not, then potentially, we do have to review that on our end to make sure that they're using the right information. So what this could look like is more of a detention review under, an application. The municipalities can do it the same way. They can review the information and confirm it, and then say, yep, you're good, you meet this, item number 3. Now, if you can't meet item number 3 because you're too close to a neighbor, then you're going to be forced into item number 1. So there isn't going to be really a situation, in my mind, where you're going to be able to, quote unquote, fake it. I don't think, at least. So, again, a rough draft here. April was a rough month for me, so I try to get as much together, my thoughts in front of you guys, to kind of get you to react and take a look at it. I wish I kind of had a more polished version of this, but like I said, I haven't vetted this enough. But this would kind of be the idea, and then Appendix 5 would be where we can list out all of those different standards following a curve number or whatever we want to do. So with that, I'd like to open it up for discussion. I think a lot of you are still taking it in, which is fun.
1B, for existing conditions, peak runoff rate has not increased. Would that be considered at the property line?
Correct, yeah. So follow, like 1B there, items 1 and 2 would kind of go along with the item number 3 demonstrating, that demonstration essentially. That, because I think, Dan, you weren't at the last one, but what we talked about is, are you ready? Okay.
Yep.
I can't remember.
I got the honor twice.
All right.
Maybe next month I'll
Yeah,
get
it's the idea where potentially you're in an area where you're gonna have a long flow path through the farm field, through other components. And so this could also be an opportunity where instead of a detention basin, someone tries to do more of a vegetated, swale with some checks in it or something. And so your stormwater system would change from a detention basin to, this idea or this change, or maybe they flatten it out, flatten out the slope to slow it down more, whatever they might look to do. It's kind of the idea. Give them some more opportunity.
So I'm going back to the conversation 2 months ago, so like somebody has a farm that's 50 acres, and they want to put like some sort of development there, they could do up to then 5 acres of impervious, is that?
To 10%, yeah, it would be up to 5, and then they would have to analyze to see how that water's flowing off of their property.
So they would do a curve number calculation that would show that the curve number has gone up likely.
Or down if they're looking to,
Simply by adding impervious, it goes up.
Yes,
and then
it
they would
goes
have
up.
to do something else to make it go back down.
correct. So it's either slowing it down, which doesn't necessarily mean you need to do detention, or potentially looking to drop the curve number back down by going to like a rain garden or some kind of natives or something like that. And so we would permit that. So that's why I think you would have to come in for that review, because then that would be their stormwater management system, that thing that reduces the curve number or slows it down or whatever it is, would essentially be what they would use. And then in the maintenance plan, that's kind of the next, if we're, getting past this with no issues, moving towards a maintenance plan where we can kind of anticipate some of these things being used and how people can actually maintain it properly. And then we would look to enforce maintenance moving forward.
So something would be like an easement or something?
Yeah, it whether or not they want to put it in an easement or we would require it, I think we'd have to kind of discuss that internally. I think normally detention basins, if they're not part of a subdivision, we don't require them to be in an easement. Unless they're serving more than one property or something like that, where you would want to give other property owners the ability to access that because neighbors aren't getting along, or whatever that happens to be. So whether it's an easement or like a drainage agreement between those property owners, I don't, either way, that would probably be fine. But from a maintenance perspective, that would get recorded, and we'd still like the recording of that. That would be then officially, per that maintenance plan, what your upkeep is, and then there's an annual report potentially that you would submit to us. And we are working on having the technology where we can have people fill out an easy form. We kind of discuss in here what we want that to look like, submit some pictures. They upload that to us, gives us an alert. We can review it. Municipalities can do the same thing too, by the way. I know you guys have SSA stuff and things going on, but our plan then is to, if they don't do it, and that's why we'd have to have something where it's not so subjective in terms of maintenance, so that we can issue a violation and assess a fine if they're not doing it, as a way of getting them to do it.
Maybe I missed something in the process. I thought I heard it could be an easement, it doesn't have to be an easement, maybe an easement if involving two property owners. I heard that segment. And then I thought I heard, well, they have to go get it recorded. And I missed the meaning of the word the pronoun it.
Okay.
Isn't it an easement? So,
No, it would be the stormwater management system. Normally, a stormwater management system does not get recorded into an easement unless that system is part of serving multiple properties, because then if the main property owner has a catch basin that they're not maintaining and it's affecting somebody else, then that would give them the ability to go and potentially repair or do the work or the maintenance required. So that system, normally we don't require it to be in an easement. So with this, it's no different. It's still your stormwater management system of how you're keeping the flow from increasing, all of that stuff. We would want the maintenance for that system recorded. That would spell out, what kind of maintenance, how often you're doing it, the maintenance report, how often do you have to submit that? Is it annually? I'm thinking annually would probably be it. That's a component we haven't really discussed yet. We've kind of touched on it in some of our post-construction best management practices and things like that, and the fact that there's a lot of infrastructure that's dilapidated, old detention basins, et cetera, right? That we're gonna be doing watershed plans where we wanna fund projects that we're gonna go and renovate some of these things. We don't want to see them then just fall back into the same pattern of disrepair 20, 30 years later.
a couple of points to that one though, just as you're formulating.
But that's a little bit outside of just this context of changing this.
Even as you're formulating it, keep in the back of your head, when you walk into recorders, there's an old attorney's joke, forgive me for telling an old attorney's joke. You can record anything in a recorder's office, even if you blow your nose on a tissue, you can go record it.
Yeah.
The difficulty becomes categorizing it. Where do you put it? Now, you record it under a category, it defers to a pin. So that's easy enough. You've got to have the category. So if, from what I understand you're saying, an easement, you would want the documentation that was also issued with the stormwater permit attached to that easement as part of the recording.
Well, yeah, that probably makes sense, right?
Okay, it racks up. Every sheet is charged. So I'm just saying, you may get some backlash. Second thing, if I create, let's say I'm on a 100-acre parcel and I create an area that will be easemented. If you're going to do something that allows after-the-fact maintenance by someone other than that property owner, let's say a non-cooperative property owner, then you need an access way to get to that easement, not just that easement, otherwise we're playing Merchant of Venice. I get a pound of flesh, but I can't take any of your blood. Well, then I can't have a pound of your flesh. So, it's a really complex, I realize it's future, but just realize you got a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross to get there. Just because I've gone through crazy things like this with DOT, so just like
I'm pretty sure all that's in the SMO, the access easement to stormwater management facilities and all of that stuff.
And who is granted access? I'm sorry for not knowing, but
It's-
is it you guys? Is
No.
it anybody?
No,
Is it?
so you're getting into the weeds, which is fine.
I understand.
It's difficult for you. No, it would be if it affects more than one property owner, right? So if it's 3 property owners, before we issue a permit for that development, those 3 property owners would need to have an agreement on what that easement's gonna look like, whose responsibility it is, et cetera. That's what's gonna get recorded. The recording of it, it's not that, it's like our enforcement tool would be, once it's agreed upon, we're gonna have it as a copy of it. The recording of it is more so to help tip off any new owners that might be coming into it, that hopefully, if they do their due diligence, they're gonna say, oh, I have some maintenance to be responsible of. It's not necessarily for us. What we would do is we would say, this is a stormwater management system that has been issued. By your lack of maintenance, you have changed how it functions, whether it's too much sediment, whether you went and bulldozed through it, you stuck a pipe through the berm of the detention basin you weren't supposed to. That right now is codified as a violation under the SMO. I don't really have to do much. It's just a matter of figuring out how I'm gonna track it within the department. Do I have enough staff, and how we're gonna do that? And can we collectively come up with a way that we're not setting up people for failure and having a maintenance checklist that most people can do? And if they can't, I'm okay with that, because maybe they have to hire someone to do that maintenance work for them. But that's their understanding that they have, 10 different designs. If they like that one the best, maybe that one is the more sophisticated, it might require some professional help on their end. But if that's what they choose, then that's what they go with, and we would hold them to that. That maintenance plan is gonna have all of that, right? And then it's issued as part of the permit.
And if it's only for the one owner, and they get their permit, they create it, and then they don't maintain it, there really are no teeth to go back at them. I mean, it's just like,
It
you're gonna
would-
go like this and say,
Right.
I did what you wanted, I did it once, I'm not gonna touch it again. Or the next owner that buys from them says, yeah, fine, I'm not gonna do
It
it.
would be a violation because now they've modified their stormwater management system,
And
which is,
okay, so there's a violation.
right,
What's the end
Fine.
result of the
a
violation?
fine,
A fine, okay, so it's a court system matter then.
yeah. absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Now, what the fines are
Keeps
gonna
on
be,
building.
like I said, into the weeds, that's where I want to get
I'm
to.
sorry,
We can discuss that, the SMO obviously already has minimum, maximum fines. We can look to assess it differently for this, since this is a little bit new. But much like the SSA essentially gives them a bill, right? If
I guess I'm looking at the fines, and if someone would still blow it off, then it would become a lien on the property, fine. However, a lien dies in 3 to 5 years, depending on what the lien is for. So, I guess, unfortunately, when we do any permitting, we also have to do the bonding fact, because it's the only way we can hold anybody to the fire, otherwise they'll just thumb their nose at us and we can't do anything, so we have to bond, and so I was just, never mind, I'm done.
Well, I would hope that people would want to avoid liens on their properties. I mean, I'm not
There-
an expert on that.
There's
but-
some that don't care. I'm telling you, they know, they die in 3 to 5, and they're just like, fine, when I go to sell it, it's gonna come up in the title, it'll be a cloud, I'll go to the title company, I'll say, hey, this is a 7-year-old lien, drop it, title company will do a small amount of fee, and they'll write an over on it, and they walk away.
Well, that's why we would still have our fines as well. So, you know, if we need to up that to make it high, or.
Too much time on the private side trying to help people get out of messes they've gotten into on the
Yeah.
public side, and so, still, never mind, I'm gonna drop it because I'm taking way too much time.
No, I'm just saying, if we have the fines, I see that as enough of an incentive as long as it's not like $25, right? Yeah, no one's gonna. So I think finding what that number is gonna be, right, yes, I shouldn't minimize that, but, to some people, they will just look to pay the fines. Which is fine. I think that's something that, when we go through this process, it's also something we've been in discussion, and I don't know how the board wants to do it, but those fines could go towards a fund. The board could decide, like, okay, let's try to find avenues of funding maintenance potentially. I don't know, right? There's still a lot more to that, but at a bare minimum, this is what we can do, and currently it would work in the ordinance. We just have to check some of that language and make sure it's buttoned up. We do have a lawyer in the room, so if there's an escape plan, maybe he can point it out to us.
Keep it for later.
Or,
He's gonna sell that as a magic secret, as soon as you pass it, he's gonna put out an advertisement, I've got the magic.
But anyway, maybe coming back to this, how do we feel about this 10%? I know there's the 5%. I wasn't a part of any of those earlier discussions. I know we have some members here that were. I don't really see a real difference between the 5 or the 10 if we're asking people to confirm, you know, these requirements, that it's not going to be a downstream issue. You know, whether it's 5 or 10 or.
So just linguistically, I think you can scratch I and then make A I and then have B become A.
Yes, I do have to rework this, so if you guys don't mind not pointing out too much on the whole language component, that would be great, but yes,
But I think that clears it up, right? Because that total impervious area, not exceeding the 10% contiguous property and then gives you the 3 things you need under that.
So one
Yeah.
thought real quick, and I don't mean, I didn't read this in depth or anything like that. It says peak runoff only, it has nothing to do with volume. Volume aside.
I suppose, I don't know. Should there be a volume reduction
Well,
as part of it?
I mean, I don't know, I'm so like, you look at a hydrograph, right, you get the peak is way up here, it's like a small increment in time, right? And, you know, curve number can change by one number, and then in theory, you can have a higher average runoff rate, which is driven by the fact that you're creating all that much more volume. You know, it's all about hydrograph shapes and how people model them, but, you know, that peak runoff moment, it's like this very tip of a hydrograph, right? And so maybe because, again, you know, we're talking about 5–10%, it's really not that big of an issue, and I don't want to make an issue, it's a potential reality. And then, you know, you've got the guy who's dealing with this very small ditch. The ditch never held water before, it never did this before, whatever. And, you know, you're potentially just setting it up that you're going to have more, you will have more flow through a system over time.
So what would you propose?
I'm not proposing anything, I'm really.
I would say one counter to that would be like even a standard detention basin. So like you look at your typical development with a standard detention basin, and you are going to be.
Yeah, but no one's, I think what I'm saying here is no one's building a detention basin in this case, right? You're building some other mitigation technique maybe, which could be, I don't know, some very small
holding device, which may or, you know, this is gonna circle back to maintenance, but it's not gonna be your typical detention basin.
Right, but what I'm saying is that the argument of, like, if some downstream person said, oh, my ditch is always holding water now, whether you follow this methodology or you put in a detention basin, there will be always, with development, there will always be an increase in.
Right, I'm not making that argument, I'm just saying that should be, I'm bringing that item up so people realize that there's still gonna be a higher system flow, there will be more flow in the system. This does not mitigate the need, I mean, the volume's not going away, it's not disappearing, and so there will be still more water going through the system, regardless of the detention.
Which is, yeah, similar to all development.
So that people know that this isn't getting around that issue. It's
Well,
just
I-
addressing that peak issue.
So that's what number 2 is with the drainage pattern, which is not worded properly. Probably needs further breakdown for, analyzing how it's entering that downstream ditch that was always underwater, whatever it happens to be. So if you run into that, this is gonna tie into later, but with the detention basins now with the downstream adequate capacity, you have to take those considerations into account, right? So I think we'd want to take those into account here as well, and maybe it needs to be written specifically that there's still downstream capacity as part of or part of B1, B2, and the B3 component. I think I was also just wanting to make sure that when you have these large sites, you might have multiple areas that drain to this property line, and if you're consolidating that, then that automatically disqualifies you from being able to get away without doing anything. That's how I was looking at it. So, and the only other way I think you accomplish this is by reducing your curve number. So if we accept the fact that if you're promoting proper vegetation or restoration, that should be soaking up some of that volume, right? So that's kind of where I was trying to run through all the different scenarios in my head, is you're either doing something mechanical, which in that case, call it detention, whether it's some structure or whatever. So then at that point, you now have to deal with adequate downstream capacity regardless. Or you're trying to attack it with like a rain garden or something, where you're creating maybe a little bit of a depressional area for vegetation, so you're getting that runoff reduction as well as that peak, without overcomplicating it and trying to maybe see if we can also make one of these happen. Because I think it would be nice if we kind of were to develop a standardized spreadsheet where someone can come in and use it, even if it's at one of you guys, just real quick, you can take a look and see where you're at and, play around with it. So from that perspective, yes, you can play around with it really quickly, but then you have to put the design together. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because someone can do the 10% doesn't mean that they won't have to potentially do some additional development to their property. And what that looks like, though, there's more flexibility instead of just going straight to detention basin. With the way this is written, like I said, it goes along with release rates and then straight to release rate for a detention facility. So that's why I tried to change it here for property to take into account you're going from your upstream end of your development to the point of release from your property. So you could have downstream infrastructure, I've seen this happen, you could already have downstream infrastructure that might take care of it.
Sure. I'm not taking exception to it.
No, I know.
Bringing
I
it to
think
the
it's
attention of everyone.
for it's good discussion. But I'm like I said, this is a working document. A lot of this was just, okay, we've got our thoughts in order, didn't have a lot of time, let's just dump them in here. Probably going to be bad, you guys are probably going to pick holes through it, but at least they can give an idea, and then we can come back at the next one with the language sorted out a little bit, some of the new concerns fleshed out. But I think the main thing was try to come up with a method and have some kind of presentation of how we can do it and relieve the concerns that a really savvy engineer is gonna go in and somehow potentially manipulate it to get away with detention. I understand the curve number thing, obviously, that's a big one. That's where I would potentially recommend, or we can discuss, to have a curve number table, so that people can't pick and choose, oh, it's an A soil or C soil, you know, that, I think that's a big one, obviously. Anytime you see those reports, they're using soil types from the existing characteristics, but you're not taking into account the proposed. What if they brought in a bunch of clay and it's a D soil, but their calculations are based off the existing B soil, right? So that manipulation, I completely understand. It's already happened in the past. I mean, that's how we.
The time of concentration calculation is the one that people can really manipulate too.
So that was, I was gonna run some numbers for that, I didn't. That's one where we can obviously get around it, I think, a little bit more if we have, you know, you're using 10 minutes, for example, for certain sizes or certain components. Or we can have, again, a spreadsheet where you're entering in your, you know, your flow length, so you would have to demonstrate that on a plan and show the slope. I feel like potentially, you know, I mean, again, we can probably get into this, but over a long period, is there gonna be much of a difference between like 24 to 22 or 26 to 24, you know, when you look at it from the flow perspective type of thing? So, but I can run some numbers for the time of concentration, or at least if you guys are warming up to this idea, continue working on it. So that was the other thing. I didn't want to spend too much effort. I just kind of wanted to get some of these thoughts down. So if it looks like we're on the right direction and potentially time of concentration is one we have to worry about, then I can run some numbers, just run some scenarios and show you what modified time of concentrations look like. Maybe we can, again, develop something like this to keep it from getting out of control. But, I don't know, any other thoughts before we?
Sorry, I'll just add one
No,
more
no.
thought on the question of five versus 10%. If you're gonna run some numbers, it may just be interesting to run like a 5% and a 10%, and what would happen then if whatever measure that they put in to mitigate the increase in flow went away, so that you would have a worst case scenario of, okay, I've got, you know, a bunch of land that was developed with 5% new impervious area, and that control measure, for whatever reason, because of property ownership change or something, went away. What's the true increase in flow rate to the offsite property? Do the same thing with 10%. That way you would have somewhat of a worst case scenario, so that you could determine, what could I live with in the event that a property owner was completely negligent on continuing to maintain their measure.
Okay. So, and do you want a certain acreage, 100 acres, just for easy math, or something, 50 acres?
You use 10, you can use 1. If you use 50, it does not, yeah, it's in the.
Okay, then what I'll do is I'll have 5%, what those numbers look like, and I'll run through a bunch of different time and concentrations, and I'll have the 10%. And I'll, if you want, I can show curve numbers as part of that. I don't know if you get, because I took this tool, just playing around with it a little bit, modifying the curve number and watching how these numbers change. Again, I'm not familiar with this method here. I would imagine if we were to develop something, it would be more along the TR55 equations plugged in. So when you plug in the curve number, it does all that stuff. And assumes, again, the IA assumption here. I think that changes based on location. They had a lot of different, I just plugged in the Camry. So we can replicate a lot of that, and staff can potentially look to come up with one of these. Don't know that I'd be able to do it in a month for this specifically.
Give yourself more time.
So depending on how the rest of this goes, we can continue to work on that and bring it back when it's more polished for you guys. But I didn't hear too much, I guess. And last time we presented this, there were a lot of concerns, I would say, compared to today. And I understand this language has to be worked on as well, and just my edits here alone.
Well, the NRCS numbers are also, I mean, it's not Bulletin 75 rainfall.
Right, yeah, so this is not bulletin, but I just, for comparatively, I was just kind of changing numbers, and it is really quick to see what it looks like. And again, the reason I was bringing this up with Appendix 5 is the rational method, you can use it for runoff. And that was another reason, Brian, where I was kind of signaling runoff, so that if it's less than 20 acres, you could potentially, use this instead of having to use a model. And this would be based again from the upstream to where it leaves the site. So most of our projects, I would assume, would be under 10 acres for these type of components, 20 acres, unless you had a really big property, which at that point, they might, no matter what they do, they might not be able to bring that down. One thing we didn't touch on, which I tried to write in here, and I don't know if you guys were reading it, was that for number 3, the reduction would be based on the calculation for the release rate from the development site.
Can you explain 3 more? I'm not
Yeah,
understanding that.
so the idea here was, because potentially if you can't make it work, right, the idea is we fall back to this. It's been in place for a long time. So you would take 0.15 and multiply it by your new impervious area, or any areas where you're clearing, where you're not able to maintain, or you're benefiting the curve number. So let's just say that's 1 CFS, that's what you get. So potentially you would either have a release rate of 1 CFS from your site, or you would have to demonstrate that your existing conditions peak runoff rate is reduced by a minimum of 1 CFS, which was kind of just an arbitrary thing to get a little bit of a reduction. So you're trying to show that at least you can make it better and eliminate the idea that if you get too close, right, if you get too close to somebody, you're not going to be able to meet that.
So proximity close, so if your development is right next to the boundary,
Right.
that's what you're saying?
Right, your release rate's going to be, whatever it is, but you don't have enough space, so there's no way you're going to get a reduction. So I wanted to work in some kind of reduction number or aspect to it, whether we wanted to go with this or have a more clear reduction based on size, or, this 0.15, maybe for the reduction is 0.30. Just so when you get too close, you can't, there's no way that you would be able to kind of come up with a situation where you can meet existing peak. You have to actually reduce it. The only way you're going to reduce it is, again, you make some kind of improvements.
So that's the difference in number 1 is the development site, and number 2 is the whole property.
No, sorry, number 2 is just basically like if a community or somebody else had more restrictive release rates.
No, not,
Oh,
I'm in actual.
sorry,
the
big
actual
number 1.
nu-
Yeah, so
Number 1.
Number 1 is designed to say, how do I find out what I multiply this 0.15 by? What do I multiply my 0.15 by?
And number 2, the actual number 2, you put in the word property.
Right.
But I would suggest that it would say, is what you meant by contiguous property, or? did
Yeah,
you
so
mean-
contiguous would make sense, yeah. So if you're
Okay.
flowing through, so if your development is here and you have 4 pins, then yeah, the actual, when it leaves your actual property would be the 4th parcel instead of the 1st
Okay.
parcel. Right. But in that case, someone might consider, if I'm selling these off, then that might not work. If they sell it off, they might need to come back and make modifications at that point. So that would be obviously something that person would need to take into account.
So this is not at all related to 10% anymore? We're talking.
It's not related to
Okay.
10%, no. This is you want to exceed 10%, or with that calculation, you can't demonstrate that you're not gonna cause an issue. Or like I said, you are now concentrating the areas over 50 acres, where in that 50 acres, you had maybe 6 spots that, because of the way that the grading left. You're now concentrating it into one location, which is changing that drainage pattern. You can no longer meet the criteria for the 10%. You have to provide detention. So now that you have to provide detention,
So what's to stop like a landowner or somebody who takes that 50 acres and wants to develop a subdivision and then says, okay, I don't want to meet the 0.15 CFS per acre release rate. I'm going to calculate what the existing release rate is for this whole 50 acres and then use that as the release rate that I base my proposed detention system on.
so in that perspective, you don't, well, that's a good question, because then you're just limiting the detention to that. Then I would say that would probably be okay if that's what we want to do, because it's more along the lines of meeting that existing peak. The only thing was I wanted to have some kind of reduction in there, and I didn't want to overcomplicate it, and since you're already doing this calculation of the 0.15, I figured if you take that and say you have to reduce your peak by that, then you could also, as an alternative, meet the allowable release rate, so your detention basin doesn't necessarily have to be as large.
So then we're maintaining existing release rates essentially, instead of requiring 0.15 CFS per acre.
As an option, if you're able to do that because you have enough property.
I think you'll never have another detention basin designed at 0.15 CFS per acre.
No.
You wouldn't.
Basins would be quite small if you got a cornfield property or anything else.
You'll end up, so what I could, somebody could do a calculation and show that the release rate off of this 50 acre cornfield is 75 CFS, because maybe the slope, and so they wouldn't have to
They
provide
wouldn't be
detention
providing
essentially.
detention.
So prior to the 0.15 and 0.04 release rates, we were using 40% of the 2-year storm
Field.
back in the early 90s. Which,
Maybe I'm thinking of it wrong.
Well, because that would be your existing, right, but then in the proposed, you're adding however much impervious, right? So your existing peak, your proposed peak is gonna be higher than your existing peak. So how are you gonna show you have a reduction by not doing detention?
not
But
necessarily.
you play with those curve numbers because you end up saying that it's residential development and the other one was row crops or something.
Right.
So they're only separated by,
Very few
you know,
numbers.
Right, that's-
4 points, you know.
That's why we would have those curve numbers locked in, so that it would be our table of, here's the curve numbers you have to choose from, so that people couldn't, right, that was the curve number discussion of the Tier 55 having too many options. The A soils, B soils, C soils, same idea.
I mean, you may have small detention basins, but like the difference between like a 50 acre cornfield and if you're providing detention at 0.15 CFS per acre, then you're reducing that release rate down to what, 7.5 CFS, if I'm doing the math right?
Right.
Versus the existing release rate off of that cornfield is, you could probably do a
10 times
calculation
that
showing
almost.
that it's, with a critical duration, 30 minute, you probably 50, 60, 70 CFS. So now I've just changed that release rate off my site from, I've multiplied it by 10, which means the detention basin is probably going to go from something that was, somewhat significant to a fraction of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And every development will look at this part of the ordinance and hone in on
Use
it.
that item.
Yeah.
What 3 was before was for areas that had a lot of storage on the site. So they were hardly releasing anything. So say, for example, what Darren just said for that 50 acre site, with all the storage, it might have only been releasing 5 CFS. So you weren't allowed to release 7.5 CFS. You had to release 5 due to all the storage volume on your site. You couldn't increase the rate. But it looks like now we got rid of that. So if there's a lot of storage, a lot of swamp, a lot of wetlands, whatever on the site, all of a sudden you're gonna be releasing more potentially off the site than you were before.
So the only thing that 3 said previously was the existing conditions peak runoff rate. That's all it said. So if you look at the original, it says, release rates for a detention facility shall not exceed lesser of the following. And number 3 simply said the existing conditions peak runoff rate, which I don't see how you ever do that with item number 1. So I don't even know why item number 3 is written in there, because there's no way you would ever do that.
Because if you have a lot of storage volume,
Okay.
you have a lot of storage volume, and it's, we had a site in Bull that was full of a lot of basins, and it was hardly releasing anything. Because you'd run your 10-day hydrograph, and it would just fill up all these holes. And then there wouldn't be any runoff in the site.
The other, just to be a stickler, on III 2.3, I guess, I kind of drew a little diagram to go with this, because it says the tributary area shall be based from the point of stormwater leaving the site to the upstream limits of the development. And then the lead-in that I already mentioned before called it out as property. So you got property, site, and development all kind of mixed there. So I'm not sure where the points are that you're talking about.
So in B, that's probably my fault. There is development site highlighted, just under the original language, development sites. That's basically what your construction area is. So it would be from the upstream portion of that to where the water leaves the contiguous property. So that probably needs to be cleaned up, but that's what the intent would be.
So it should say development site, and then the
For
stormwater leaving the contiguous property to the upstream limits of the development site.
Correct.
Okay.
And I just left it as development there, but correct, yeah, development site, contiguous property area. Well, I do want to mention that obviously with number 3, if we're allowing the 10% exemption for impervious area, it's based on this same idea though. So if you guys aren't on board with this one, I don't know how we can do the 10%.
So here's my question to Dennis is, so if that's for the subdivision, right, the guy that's platting it and putting it all in, but doesn't every home that have to go in there get a stormwater permit?
Well, as a subdivision, yeah, it's permitted as a whole, so you have to account for however many homes, and you have a certain impervious percentage, which is then, your detention is based on that. But I think the point here is that if you go to 50 acres and you're doing a subdivision, I don't see how you don't take the 0.15 over the 50 acres. You said about 7.5 CFS, right? How are you going to go from cornfields to 60% impervious and get a 7.5 CFS reduction on your peak flow rate without having to go with a detention basin or something along those lines, right? You can't do it. So you can't meet number 3, right? Because you can't get that reduction. So you got to go to a design that goes back to number 1, which I'm not eliminating. I'm just saying, so the prime example is solar farms. Long Axis Drive, over 20, Fire Road, over 20 feet, can't do the 12.5 foot, and they're proposing to go from fallow to natives. So now they're proposing 20 acres of natives compared to 1 acre of impervious. That's what number 3 is designed to allow them to do, is to take advantage of that. That's the idea. It's not to allow the subdivision, and that's why I put that reduction in there. And then that's why I'm saying that reduction number, maybe we need to increase it. I was just trying to do one simple calculation. You use one simple calculation, You get that, and then you use it maybe in multiple ways. So if that needs to be increased, then you could, but I just, to your example, Darren, like or a commercial development, what are you doing, 80% impervious? There's no way you're doing a reduction in your peak.
Well, maybe this item needs to be more specific to solar farm type of circumstance, because
The solar
I'm
ones,
in
I was thinking
Port of
cluster.
3-2, your detentions are gonna become very small but once you say it's cornfield or soybean field, whatever, and now you're going to a
But what if
dense development.
But what if a developer wants to use the same strategy, then they can't? You're limiting them to a detention basin, so why would I only do it to, I'm just saying, as playing devil's advocate, if I have enough space, or I'm a farmer, and I want to do, some greenhouses and other things, and as part of that, I was already planning on doing some rain garden, or whatever, then that farmer potentially can't use the same methods that you could on a solar farm or any developer that's looking to use green infrastructure. Brad, you have a lot of Algonquins and Tories for green infrastructure to solve their problems, so I don't want to make it explicit for solar farms.
Well, we've talked about this a lot for the agricultural community, specifically, employing NRCS BMPs, buffer strips, other types of BMPs that are established with defined methodologies already established. So that's part of what's driving this, is actually trying to provide that flexibility for a variety of different land uses. But it does have to, provide the benefits that are required, and then the management is going to be, another challenge we'll have to address later on. But that's kind of the idea behind that, is providing the flexibility while really providing the benefits that we are looking for, and not just mandating something because that's the way it's normally done. But there are challenges with this approach, undoubtedly, but that's kind of the mandate we've been given from the MCSC, is trying to find ways to provide this flexibility.
And I think number 3 highlights the idea of, to get that reduction, you're probably relying on more green infrastructure. And that's something that we would like to see in general, right, increase. So this is kind of the way, and like I said, some of these values and numbers in terms of how much of a decrease we want from that existing peak for number 3, we can discuss that, right? And if it seems like this is too small, then we can potentially bump that up, and, as part of this, I can try to come back and run some scenarios, or, some of these ideas that you guys might have to show you what the numbers look like. Type of thing, but it ties into, here's an NRCS tool again that's used, so we can do that. And this should be clear that it's not like you can use number 3. So you either, and this is again the wording in my mind, it's either you're doing number 3, and I guess to your point, Darren, maybe you can do that with detention basins type of design. So that's where vetting some of these details a little bit more would be ideal. Maybe number 3 is you can't use detention basins. Maybe you do have to rely on different methods at the end of the day.
I'm all for flexibility in like the 5 and 10%. I think in the solar example, and like the agricultural example, I love those ideas, but I just get very nervous about this one here, because there would be, for larger developments, there's so many ways to take like these 50 acres and put, even if I started up, 40 acres, I put a shopping center at 98% or 98 curb number, and I put the remaining 10 acres as prairie, right? And so that curb number goes down to like 60, call it. I could prove very easily that I've significantly reduced the curve number for the site, and I probably could do some work with slopes and everything to show that I have had a significant decrease in the flow rate, but that decrease going from like 70 CFS in existing condition to maybe 50 CFS in the proposed condition. But I haven't put in any detention, I haven't done any sort of major stormwater management at this point. But that's just it's a huge change in like the philosophy, and I think you're just gonna have a lot of sites trying to come through with big sites coming through with no detention.
Well, I mean, this is important because, you know, the other thing we do talk a lot about are what are the unintended consequences. And so, you know, a lot of the things that are being brought up, you know, are helping to flesh that out. Because the last thing we want in the world is to, you know, try and provide that flexibility to achieve a certain goal and miss the mark or set up a system for abuse. So, I mean, everything you're talking about are the types of things we wanted to, you know, bring into discussion. You know, we're looking to you guys to bring this up. So everything you guys are saying is really appreciated. We want to facilitate this type of discussion.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be adverse. I mean, I'm just trying to point out some things as, you know, having seen some crazy development permit submittals.
And, yeah, well, that's, you know, that's my biggest concern. And so everything you've said has resonated.
Well, we can demonstrate some of this in the examples and using like just this spreadsheet. I know the numbers aren't right, but in terms of the rainfall and stuff like that. But in terms of the curve number, like I said, just looking at it, it's going to be really hard to take 20 acres, do 98% impervious, and I don't know what it was prior, like what's the existing condition prior, because if it's mostly impervious, then you're probably grandfathered in. So then you're grandfathered in, you don't have to do new detention. But if you're going from like 85 existing to now 90% impervious, 98, I just don't see how you'd be able to bring that existing conditions peak down significantly by not, like your design, you know, you mentioned changing slopes. Well, so then you are making some improvements. You are cognizant of that. Whether or not your design works, you know. So I don't think you're just like throwing something on paper and saying, here's my numbers and not doing anything. I think you are in your mind. But I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, because now you're thinking about how to do it properly. So if we feel confident that there's a reduction, you know, there's nothing that says, like in my mind, as Steve pointed out earlier, the 0.04 and 0.15 come from the sanitary permits. You're talking about huge reductions there. And so this is one aspect. You have to remember that just because you can drop it down, right, because now we're in detention, just because you can drop the peak down doesn't mean that there's adequate downstream capacity. How do you solve that, right? So there's a lot more layers than just, okay, I meet my existing peak, I'm done with it, in my mind, at least when you're looking at this altogether, because that's one thing we're going to get into is when you're releasing off-site, where are you releasing to now? If you're releasing to something that doesn't have capacity, or you know it has way less capacity than the existing peak rate that you dropped off, and you don't want to spend dealing with that neighbor or thousands of dollars of off-site improvements, guess what? You're probably going to end up dropping that peak even more to work with the downstream capacity. So I think there's, you know, a lot more going on, and maybe we need to just think about that overall. And as you guys come up with ideas, I'd love to take them and work with them more and try to find a way to fine tune this, because you're right, it is a change on how we're thinking about it, and I don't know that that's necessarily bad. And I do want to push that envelope, you know, here with you guys and see if we can. If we can't make it work, then we can't make it work.
Can I build off of
Sure.
So one of the points that Stoyan just made, and this has been a big part of our discussion, is a lot of this is intended to, you know, I guess force the applicant to think, you know, differently than, you know, this is how it's always done. And I guess I'm going to kind of pose this to you, Darren, because you and I have talked a lot about this in the past. You know, our stormwater is our groundwater, and when you are, you know, a subdivision or a commercial development, you are taking a percentage of water that would otherwise infiltrate down and piping it. Whereas if you are doing a filter strip, buffer strip, things along those lines, you're facilitating infiltration in those. I'm not quite sure how we can integrate that goal into this, but I do think that that needs to be part of our goal. And then there is a water quality component of that too. As my understanding at one time, we were actually thinking about requiring permeable paving. And I think at the direction of the State Water Survey, they pushed us back on that, saying, that's a direct conduit for chlorides to get into your aquifers if you have people on shallow wells in the vicinity. But ideally, part of this is providing a kind of a pause and providing an opportunity for people to look at different directions to accomplish both reduction and infiltration. And so as we have discussions, if we can keep that in mind and think of ways that, can this be designed to help facilitate that and maintain a percentage of our groundwater infiltration as we develop. In my presentations, I often point out, where we need the water the most is where we have the most people, but where we have the most people, we've paved over everything and lost the recharge. Our groundwater, or at least our sand and gravel, and to a certain degree our shallow bedrock, are a perfectly renewable system as long as we take care of it. And so maintaining that groundwater recharge with potable water, I think should be one of our goals. I'll get off my soapbox, but that's part of our discussions, and I would like that to be in people's minds as we have this discussion.
Yeah, I think when we talked earlier, months ago, about the water quality and infiltration parts of the ordinance, and
right.
I think those will go a long way in helping that out.
The other question I have is on your table of approved models.
Oh,
Appendix
yeah.
5.
Sure. That one I haven't changed or done anything, so.
Okay.
Can't critique me there.
All right. I would just say, check the SMO, but you have at the top hydrologic and hydraulic models, but I'm not seeing hydraulic models on there. And I checked, and they're not in the SMO either, so I'm not sure, are you trying to limit these to like non-proprietary models? Is that what you're saying?
No, this was done before me, so I had no input on this table.
Okay.
So
All right.
if you're, just another thing, when we look at it, if you're finding some issues with it, then we can correct. I was simply pointing this out, that this was the area in the ordinance that talks about, like, you can do X, Y, and Z when it comes to figuring out your runoff or your detention or whatever. And this might be a good section where we can add, here's the curve numbers that you would use for different ground cover types. Here's, whatever we wanted to do, this would be the section. I merely meant to put it in here that it exists, but we can definitely look at it closer and see if there's portions of it that don't make sense, and update this as well with it. But this would be, I think, to me, and I apologize, there's about, I think it goes to like 5 or 6 items. And so you can see here, it starts to talk about, well, if you're doing this, you can't do that. And so curve numbers would be something that can come as a later number in this appendix that can be referenced. That's why I referenced it in the language up here as, hey, should we update Appendix 5 and have some language in here that would cover the whole curve number, time and concentration, concerns for manipulation aspect of it, and try to incorporate, our own spreadsheet tool.
Do you get submittals with proprietary software that you can't run?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's not necessarily an issue. We do have some ourselves where we can kind of take those numbers, punch it in, and just kind of check or just back of the envelope stuff. Just like, does it make sense, or hey, something looks really off here, to comment on it. But no, yeah, and we don't discourage people. Like if you're using Pond Pack or Swim or whatever's out there these days. I don't know.
Okay. We had, at Lake County, we created a policy that, because we had a lot of submittals coming in on proprietary software that didn't match, you know, like the inputs and outputs were manually edited to give us the numbers that we would approve. And so we were like, hey, you know, we want to run this ourselves to see if that output actually exists. So I don't know if you have that situation, but it got kind of bad for a while there.
Yes, we do, and we just use some of the free sampler stuff that you might find out there, stuff like that, where we can just, you know, we're limited to maybe, you know, 3 hydrographs or something. So, you know, but
Okay.
we can run it a little bit just to say, like,
Okay.
is it ballpark, is it not? But yeah, we've run across that, so it's kind of an internal component that we look at the numbers, and yeah, sometimes I'll get one, I'm like, oh boy. You know, even just the old Tier 20 stuff, I have a sheet of just like the acronyms or the 2-letter components, just so I remember, like, oh yeah, which one's acres, which one's whatever. So, and
My old manual?
no, thank you, Brian, appreciate it. You can hold on to that.
It's right next to the WSB2 one.
You got the floppy disk for that?
Paper in there.
All right, any other, so Mike, I'll include this appendix 5 more closely, we can discuss it, maybe it's removing hydraulic, from here. I mean, I'm not like, heck one, I don't know if that's hydraulic or hydrologic or whatever it is, maybe.
Hydrologic.
It's okay. So if you're saying remove hydraulic, I'll just cross it out right now.
I think so. I mean, yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Obviously, I think staff has their homework cut out for them to come back and work on some of this. I think what we'll try to do is come up with some examples, show you the inputs, the outputs. We'll try to pick maybe some properties in the county that have no affiliation. We'll just pick them just for this year. There's some grading there. There's, you know, we can plot development in different areas and run it and see what we get. Sound like a plan? Okay, in the meantime, if anybody wants to email me anything about this, if you think of something else, let me know. I'll incorporate it, and like I said, we'll see if we can come up with something. Quick question. The idea of the 0.15 and using that as a reduction, do you want me to stick with that, or do you want me to show you maybe what a 0.3 would look like, or just do the 0.15 and then go from there? I don't know. I just want to incorporate as much as I can so that the next time around we don't have like another 10 ideas that pop up, which is fine, but I'll just leave it at 0.15 and we can circle back to see what that looks like. Okay. All right, anything else before we close discussion on this item? No? Okay. Go ahead and close discussion on 5.1. And we'll go ahead and move to 5.3. Okay. What we are proposing is to modify our exempted developments. So it's just one sheet for you guys, page 8. Modification to the exempted development language to include improvements in existing, so this would be exempt if you are improving an existing building with no changes to footprint outside the floodplain, or improvements to existing building with no changes to footprint within the floodplain that does not constitute a substantial improvement. I think what we've seen here is, unfortunately, there's some NFIP, so FEMA, the flood insurance policy baked into a little bit of this. What we tend to see is require stormwater permitting for interior improvements, even though it doesn't constitute a substantial improvement. Technically, until it's a substantial improvement, it doesn't need to meet floodproofing. We don't see the need to take in stormwater permits for that and charge it. What we've been doing is, if it involves a building permit, we've been asking people to submit the 50% rule, so the cost estimate, and we keep it on record. If it's, so in the county, reshingling, reciting, permits are not required in most municipalities, they probably are. So for the municipalities, they can continue to track that. For us, what we have is a stormwater permit determination letter. It's free, you just submit your cost estimate, and we can still track it. So it's just meant to get us out of the need to issue permits and take in fees, and people really being confused about it and getting to the point where, well, if I buy a microwave, do I have to include that? So, so that's what this is intended to do, is just to clean it up. And instead of talking about maintenance, because maintenance would be like you're not really changing anything, this would be improvement. So if someone wanted to remodel their kitchen, there's no exterior improvements, they're not in the floodplain, it makes it a little bit clearer. If they're in the floodplain, we would take in the cost estimate, review it, it's on file until they exceed that then. And this is our way too of sending them that letter just to notify them of where they're at, what it means, and like, hey, you know, you're at 20%, just so you know. So that communication is always happening. So that's what this is meant to do. So I don't know if there's any discussion, questions on it. So probably, I do need to look at the definition here of maintenance to an existing building. So that's probably something I might bring back just to show you what that cleaned up version was. But just wanted to, again, get some of these things down for you guys, but that's the intent, so.
Why wouldn't you leave it maintenance or?
Because technically, if you're making an improvement, it's not considered maintenance. And if it's not substantial improvement, you don't technically need to meet floodproofing. Now, if someone wants to do it, great, but it's never been the direction to require it, and that's why the rule exists. Ernest, are you ready to go, or are you still thinking?
You could fall into an oddity. Let's,
Okay.
a zillion years ago, which a couple people here are old enough not, when you would file your income taxes on a building you owned as your residence, you could take a percentage off for depreciation. The logic of the IRS was, don't do anything to a building for 25 years and it'll fall apart. So by that logic, they don't do that anymore, obviously. But if I'm going to change out all the windows in a building because they're 25 years old, am I doing maintenance or an improvement? And there's a hell of a cost. Same with flooring, heating system, anything. At what point does maintenance fall out of improvement?
That's why I removed it, because B, the original B was maintenance in an existing building within the floodplain that does not constitute a substantial improvement. So I don't want to do it just to maintenance. So it could be maintenance or improvements, if that.
I guess that's what I.
That would be better. I could go with that better, just because
Okay.
I could easily see maintenance cost an arm and a leg.
I want
So-
to be exempt either way, right? Then that question, is it maintenance or is it improvement? I don't know, do I need a permit? I don't know.
I think both would be, with the or would be a lot better.
So then we will have to work on the definition, because that definition is horrible, just letting you know. Let me just show.
This is where you're supposed to say, but I wasn't involved with that definition.
And
That's how you said, I heard it, I
A
read
million
it.
years ago, Ernest.
And
I know, but that's his
Yeah.
catchphrase. It's like, oh, we know it, but I wasn't involved with that.
At this point, it doesn't matter.
I'm kidding.
Maintenance of existing, so it says re-roofing, replacement of windows, reciting, carpeting, painting, installing a new water heater, installing a new electrical service, and maintenance tasks
Yeah.
that do not require a building permit. So if it requires a building, like you're replacing windows, but you need to do the framing, that's gonna require a building permit.
That's different. Framing's different than changing out windows, the sashes. and the-
Well, I don't know the municipalities. Like I said, re-roofing is a permit in
In
a lot
some
of municipalities.
Yep.
So, your whole maintenance is a not maintenance thing, if we just call it, that's why I was like, if we just call it an improvement, because you maintaining it, would that be an improvement, or it just, so we can do both, I guess, I don't know. To your points, if you guys are already calling it out, other people are gonna call it out too.
If we could have just either or, maintenance or improvement,
And I would almost be tempted to remove this definition completely, because I don't know why then it really wouldn't apply.
yeah, but unfortunately, I could see someone drive by their neighbor's house, see him doing something and turn them in. And so at least if you have this and you said, well, they came in and they got a letter, see, they're.
Right, but I'm just saying, there's no longer a definition needed for maintenance, because it doesn't matter if it's maintenance or improvement, so I have a list for maintenance if it's gonna include everything. The main thing is that it's just not a substantial improvement.
Doesn't change the flood.
I'm trying to think, I know there's an example that would say it should stay in, and I'm trying to grab it in 2 seconds, and I'm not, I don't want to see it removed. I apologize. And I can't say why this second, but I'll think about why, but I'd rather see it maintenance or improvement and stay in, not taken out.
So, no, I'm agreeing with the maintenance or improvements aspect of it.
Okay?
I just don't see the need for listing maintenance activities, because now you're also listing improvements, so who cares if re-roofing is considered maintenance or an improvement?
You're saying taking maintenance out of the definition section?
No, I'm saying take this definition out here out. Maintenance of existing building, take that out. It's still gonna read, let me get that, it's still gonna read, get there. It's still gonna read maintenance or improvements to an existing building, it's just not gonna, we're just not gonna define what maintenance is.
I like that only from the standpoint, you can't accommodate all the municipalities. And so, I don't, and then maintenance becomes, no offense, arguable.
Yeah,
I mean, but that's okay.
because it's all included.
It's all included.
That's right. So I'm okay.
Should we
You wanna
say
remove the
any
definition of
work? Any work to an existing building? Like, we can,
I'd watch that, because as a dumb example, somebody decides they're going to raise the structure 5 feet. Well, that's any work. I don't like, that's beyond
In theory,
improvement, that's beyond anything.
But it doesn't change the footprint, and there's no exterior disturbances, and at the end of the day, all we're looking for is the cost on the step. So it really doesn't, it really is any work, because without the changes to the footprint of the building.
Painting would qualify.
I'm being irked by an old debate teacher who said, never, use never or always in your debate, because someone will find that error. I'm being
As a
irked.
FEMA, yes. But we have never asked people to put painting on their cost estimates.
But it's included in the definition.
No, painting is not, is
You
it?
may think it's an improvement, your neighbor may not.
Yeah,
That's right.
no, I think it is in, yeah, painting.
Painting.
Carpeting,
Well,
painting,
it's something
installing.
paint.
Yeah.
I mean, the question is, so how much of a nanny do you want to be? Because you have the same thing outside the floodplain and inside the floodplain. Technically, anytime anybody does anything, they should come get a letter from you on if that's an exempted development. Seems to make no sense to me. I understand the FEMA part of it, but it seems like we're getting very over the top.
Well, they don't have to come to me, they just gotta confirm if they're outside of the floodplain.
Well, exempted developments upon review and verification by the enforcement officer, and I've fought for years on this thing.
Oh, for
because-
this
Be-
part?
Yeah, for this whole section, because that was before when we had the dredging in there, right? I read the dredging, go, you're an exempted development, the farmer goes, well, then I'm good, and I go dig, and I'm like, well, you should go ask. Why am I gonna ask if it's exempt? Well, because they might not think you are. Well, I says I am, right? And you're ending up with the same problem in A and B, and to your point, based on the definition, any work, painting,
Well,
Cleaning.
let me back up though,
Gutters is
because
maintenance.
upon review and verification would apply to all of these then.
Correct. And I think that's
So,
awful
I feel
language.
like you're bringing up something overarching, just in
Right.
addition to this.
It's in addition to this, but I
Okay.
think this, before, right, the rest of them, you could go, how many ditch digging permits do you get, or guys that wanna clean ditches, how many, you know, whatever. But in theory, the way this is written, and then based on the FEMA requirement, I mean, we're gonna have 8,000 people realistically any given day that should come into your office and get a letter from you for free. And I'm not arguing on any of those points. I
We
think
do
it's a
that
lot.
currently. This doesn't change our operating procedure. It's just whether or not I issue a permit, which cuts down on my permitting, now I'm spending less time. We're doing this anyway, it's just, what we're doing right now is, we're looking at it and saying, okay, we need to look at the 50% rule form and figure out if they're over or not. So we do that anyway. And then for us, as you guys just discussed, I think we spent a whole day discussing this and also discussing, well, what is other maintenance tasks? And if you're doing re-roof, if you're doing anything that doesn't require a building permit, or if it requires a building permit, like, let's say you're changing a water heater. I have to do a $150 permit for a water heater.
No.
That's what, no, I'm just saying, that's
Yeah.
what this says, because there's a building permit associated with it. So this would remove, you know, all of that, and for me to have to do a building permit, but I'm still going through those same steps. That's not changed. This would change that I no longer have to go through the paperwork and issue a stormwater permit for a water heater if it's not. you
So
know,
right
just
now,
a-
you have to issue a stormwater permit for a water heater.
We stopped.
In theory, you'd have
In
to,
theory,
by
I would
letter
have
of the
to.
law, but they have
I
taken
would
a
have to.
policy
Okay,
action.
but that's my point, let's change the law, because you won't want my call on Sunday morning when I have a water heater out and I'm gonna replace it, and I'm gonna do it anyway,
I
with or without
understand.
you.
Yes, we, in the
So-
past, we have issued stormwater permits for water heaters because of this that's the exact maintenance of existing buildings. So then I go to that definition, and it's in the floodplain, but it requires a building permit, so it's not exempt. Because because in maintenance, it does not require a building permit. So I have no choice but to issue a stormwater permit for this component. I've talked with Adam, we've changed that, but I need to update this. That's why this update is also important, so I can continue
So is
to
it-
officially.
Is the goal to just be able to check the FEMA box, but not have to deal with it at all on your end?
Correct. If the goal is to get the cost form in, track it, as either part of a determination letter, because now I have a permit number, I don't charge a fee. Because we historically have not charged fees for that. Or it comes in as part of a water heater or faucet or whatever, and I ask for that information to exempt you from a stormwater permit, because then I'm confirming that you're not above the 50% mark. And so as part of that review, the building permit gets issued, I exempt it from a stormwater permit. We didn't used to do that. I've done plenty of stormwater permits for just water heaters and had this discussion, and it's been a tough one for me. And that's part of this deep dive on like flood, so there's another floodplain component that I bring later into this agenda as well that's related to this. So this is just meant to say, if you're doing any work to your home, if you're outside of the floodplain, you're good to go. So that doesn't change. The reason I add it with no changes to the footprint is I don't know, that, should just get a phone call just to confirm, like, hey, I'm doing an addition, but your addition's gonna put you in the floodplain or into a wetland area, or whatever it might be, I don't know. So that's why I put no footprint, because then there's no questions asked. And then for number B, again, it's the same idea, really, but the only thing is, does not constitute a substantial improvement. That would be where we would do that review. We're doing that review anyway. So none of this really changes the workflow steps. but it will eliminate me having to go through the paperwork to issue a stormwater permit for every water heater, which would save time for us in the end.
So you'd want to change A and B to any work.
Anywhere.
And then
Or
we
we
want
can
to
do maintenance
remove,
in.
and then we want to remove the maintenance definition.
I want to, yes, this maintenance definition is killing me. I'm not gonna lie.
Sounds like it accomplishes the goal, yeah.
So, to your point in our discussion here, and not. this is
And we
outside
can
of the-
circle back
it's
to
outside
the
of scope
overarching.
that you had, right, but here's my thought on the overarching, right? So like, A sounds like it's outside the floodplain, we're not worried about it, right, as long as there's not a change of the thing. B, they need to come in because of the floodplain portion of it, right, because they're within the floodplain. Roads and trails, whatever, but like gardening and tillage and some of these others, I mean, I think you have things in here that you can actually like exempt, and they're done, they're over with. They don't need to be review and verified.
So I think what you're saying is take this review and verification and drop it into each one specifically that it's needed for.
Or run like a 1 and 2 exempted development, like exempted development, no brainer, here it is, the plain language based on the definitions, you're done. And then 2, these are also exempted developments, but we got it
Upon
okay.
review. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Well,
I think that would
do you like
just
the
clarify
two? You
for
like the 2 buckets? I think that'd be easier for people probably.
Yeah, rather than having to read through a page
Read through
list.
because then you're getting
So I missed it.
by the time you get to the end of installation and repair of a waste disposal down here.
Yeah, you're kind of like, forget it, I'm done.
Okay, no, I really like that idea.
And if you move that around, you might be able to clarify D too, because otherwise D bumps you into the appendix for the, which
Yeah,
we dealt with
but
that before.
I
but-
think we have a previous one. This is my issue when I'm pulling stuff, is I'm not working off probably previously changed language. Let me, because I know we have worked on exempted development before.
If we clarify it.
Let me get that clarification for you guys. I'll do a new section even, or I'll do the 2 sections even,
Yeah.
and I'll clean it up and I'll show you guys what that looks like.
And we're, at the same time, we're going to remove maintenance in the definition section.
Right?
Or do we just want to do that? I mean, it sounds like you know that like now.
Well, yeah, well, no, I mean, it'll be together, but I don't see a need for this any longer if we're gonna say any work, or if that's the intent is any work. Unless the municipalities want that in there because maybe they have building codes that talk about maintenance
Well,
differently. I
but
don't
they can
know.
always adopt your ordinance with these amendments. So
Yeah,
if they
but
want
it's
to,
a
they can tack on to
If
it.
it's a small change, we can help them out, obviously. Help them out, I don't know, Scott, any other municipalities, maybe that'll come up in our CSC. Would you care if it just says any work or maintenance?
I'm still trying to rationalize getting rid of it versus keeping it in, because like re-roofing, Huntley scrapped roof permits. It just
Okay.
took too much time. Same with siding permits too. But every new water heater requires a building permit. So it's being looked at regardless. Fortunately, we don't have any homes in the floodplain, so wouldn't have to go deal with issuing a stormwater permit for that, but it does exist. But I think the intent was for homes in the floodplain that have, an issue and, is replacing a water heater that was damaged, does that constitute a substantial improvement if it's a repair or a replacement?
No, but the problem is that I can't exempt it because if it requires a building permit, then it only includes tasks that do not require a building permit. So I couldn't exempt this. That's why I wanna, so basically this is kind of a definition that no longer really has any meaning to it because it's gonna apply to any work, whether it's repairs or you wanna update your shower, I don't know, whatever. Then, in both situations, you'd be looking at it, is it a substantial improvement? No, no permit. Is it a substantial improvement? No, no permit. And to every case, the same. So now you're dealing with everything equally, and it's just a yes or no. And if it's a yes, then it's not only a permit, but you're potentially having to flood-proof the structure, right? So, that's the idea behind it. So it sounds like even the municipalities no longer do re-siding, re-roofing type of stuff. So I would say we should just remove it, and then the question would be, do we want the language to say any work or maintenance or improvements would be, I don't know if there's any legal.
The problem with putting maintenance or improvements there and then not defining maintenance
Yeah.
is someone's gonna catch you. So there's where any work would almost make more sense, because at least
All
you
right.
got rid of maintenance.
Let's try any work.
Try any work. And you're gonna recompile this as
I'm gonna
like
recompile
two
this.
lists.
Yeah, because I think that makes sense to Tyler's point. I mean, yeah, if I was reviewing that, and I never really read that, to be honest. Just like a lot of things. Remember, I didn't do a lot of this right now.
That's right, that's your catchphrase. You gotta stick with it.
Brian, you had something you were gonna bring up earlier?
Maybe we answered.
Remember that far back?
Sorry.
Okay, I will
My
note next
subconscious has
time.
directed me to not do such a thing.
I will note next time to let Ernest go last, got it.
I go to one meeting, she tells me where I have to sit. I go to another one, I'm told where I have to speak. Wow. Okay, fine, be that way.
Strike that from the record.
That was like 20.
All right, let's move on so I can wrap you guys up. Floodplain small, so moving on to 5.4, so we'll make the changes to 5.3, bring that back. 5.4, floodplain small accessory structure requirements. So here's why I have this one before I even go through it. We have a lot of prefab sheds from Menards that are even less than like 120 square feet. And what I've kind of been instructed previously is, all right, if it's in the floodplain, it still has to meet floodproofing requirements because it's 2 walls and a roof and X, Y, and Z. So we dove deeper into the National Flood Insurance Policy. I got a response back from James Singh from FEMA. So the way we were looking at it was, in the National Flood Insurance Policy, first off, you have 2 forms, one that's a dwelling form, one that's a property form. If you're going to do a dwelling form, that's going to include your single-family residence. You can include up to 10% of a detached garage, or theoretically 10% of a detached structure, which a shed would technically qualify for. You would then have to do individual property forms for each other structure that you want as part of that. Now, part of the issue is that in order for you to be able to purchase flood insurance for that, the structure has to have a foundation. A lot of these do not, right? And so, and when I wrote this, I hadn't gotten the response back yet, so probably this will need to get modified, but here's kind of, I'd just like to read this to you guys. So, sheds are insurable under the general property form of the standard flood insurance policy, assuming they have at least 2 walls, a roof, I didn't include this, sorry, but a roof, and are permanently attached to a foundation. The shed may also be insured under the dwelling form of the standard flood insurance policy for up to 10% of the building coverage for the single-family residence. In terms of mandatory purchase, there is no exception for low-value accessory structures. For the purposes of mandatory purchases, these accessory structures must be incidental to the primary use of the main structure. So they're not linked. So a shed would be incidental to the home. Mandatory purchase does not apply if only the shed is in the special flood hazard area. So if automatically your home isn't in the special flood insurance, you actually can't get insurance for your shed. I don't know how many people are. The reason why I want to take small accessory from the floodproofing is that under the building code, at 600 square feet, that's when a structure is required to do a foundation. So at that point, it would meet some of these definitions. Now, something I didn't include, and I don't know how many people have lights and mechanical stuff, but that would probably be something, is if they're proposing any kind of electrical or mechanical, to have a note in here to say that it would, you know, that would need to be elevated. But that's the main reason why we want to take it out, is what we've seen is the requirement previously is that you buy a prefab Menard shed, it's made out of, I don't know, vinyl, PVC, plastic, whatever, and they're cutting these holes on the side of it to meet the flow-through vents. The material is already flood-proofed, but, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. So the idea would be that your fill requirements would still apply, which a lot of these get the 5 cubic yard exemption in the floodplain. But then the only other thing that we would really consider is you don't have any electrical or mechanical in there that would be, you know, tied back to the house or something like that, you know, that would be a problem. So if you're doing something like that, that would need to be elevated. Or just in general, any electrical or mechanical stuff in a live flooding environment is dangerous. And then it would just need to be anchored properly. That's what we would be looking at. And for the anchoring, we've never really, people just say, well, here's what the specs say, and we're saying, you know, looks good type of thing. But we would exempt it from all the other floodproofing requirements, which I don't know from that type of discussion, we would probably still want to issue a permit for it because it's development in the floodplain. But I would look to, you know, have like a very reduced fee on that, but that's something that we can look at as maybe a review consideration. But that's the background behind wanting to remove the small accessory behind. So I think I do need to touch up this language, but ideally I would like to just scratch out all of the areas related to small accessory. And I don't know if maybe it's just creating an exemption for it, like A, B, C, D, maybe it comes before that or after, just like your idea of the multiple categories, that might actually work better because gets lost in this paragraph. So I think that would be easier.
So Stoyan, we just did one of these with you guys on the Fox and McHenry.
Okay.
This kind of gets rid of, because they're really incidental, there's like no engineer really wants to spend $500,000 for somebody. I'm thinking if it's again, you don't need an engineer to figure out because you're going to be under 5 cubic yards.
Right.
You're in the fringe, you're not in the floodway.
Right.
Let them pass go.
Right. It would alleviate
Because it's just a lot of
the need. Yeah.
little work that
And
isn't
again,
necessary by us.
It's going to be critical that they don't do a foundation. I think if they do a
Right.
foundation, then obviously that's the key language. And I don't see a lot. And usually when they do, they bring up the concrete walls up anyway, type of thing, and then they put it on top. So most of the
Just want to make sure whatever you spell out, I think it's important that waive the engineering requirements as you're waiving everything else, 'cause
Yeah, I think we haven't required engineering unless you can't meet the 5 cubic yard exemption. Maybe there's more involved with what they're doing, but we've
Yeah.
never
maybe that one just
required
kind of
it.
slipped by and they called us because I don't know.
Maybe they called.
That's
you
the first one
because
we've done like that. And
Maybe they
many
called you
years.
because they just wanted you to take care of it. I don't know. I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Great idea.
We have, and it's just simplifying those type of requirements. We've typically had to, in some cases, charge $750, $800 for like something that they buy for $99 from Menards.
That's what this guy was doing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And there's the county topo thinking, you're on the fringe of the whatever.
Go ahead,
Do you want to say less than 600 square feet in that sentence?
There is a small accessory definition.
Oh,
Again,
okay.
with being rushed, I probably should have included that for you guys, but it does say 599 square feet or less, I think, is
Okay.
the way
Never
that
mind.
it reads. And then, that's, well, let me pull it up, because I think it's probably, take some more notes on it. There are some like values, you can't have this or that probably we don't. Small accessory, okay, less than 600 square feet in size, less than 22,150 in value. I don't know where that comes from, I'm not gonna lie.
Not adjusted for inflation, obviously.
Only used for storage of vehicles and or tools, and is accessory to a residential building. So I think this is still probably okay. It's just getting rid of a lot of the other stuff. You can't insure a car, by the way, I don't know if anybody has.
Withdraw my comment.
FYI, for insurance purposes, the contents do not include vehicles as part of what you can insure, so.
Your value is a little bit low. I just built one last year for 10 grand, that was 10 by 12.
Well, this is less than 22.
Whatever, as you're updating, you may want to.
I don't know where this value comes from, Joe. I would almost it's almost confusing to me, to be honest, because then I almost have to get a cost estimate for it. The reason for the cost estimate is part of the flood insurance. If it doesn't make sense in the definitions, they can't even insure
It's not the
it.
structure, it's what's inside that's worth money.
So I almost think we should just cut B out, to be honest.
Right.
I don't know, unless there's a justification for it, I was not able to find. I wasn't even thinking about that at all until I just pulled up the definition, so we can strike that. Okay, I think what I'll do is I'll do a separate section for the exemption of the flood protection standards. Okay. All right. Moving along. Any other discussion items before we close this one out? No? Okay. Adequate downstream capacity language. Here's another one. Again, just put it together. Did a lot of modifications. I did also highlight the 72-hour thing. I don't know if so basic requirements, stormwater management facilities shall be designed to dewater within 72 hours following that of the design storm. I felt like somebody mentioned it should be closer to 96, or someone else did.
Probably me. As you know, we do a lot of these from the county, and 72 is hard to hit on these very small 5-acre and smaller sites.
So I highlighted that just in case. I don't know if there was any other input.
Just the one challenge with the longer duration is the palette of plants that you can have living in there. And it's, we're trying to promote green infrastructure, and then having lag times that don't really allow much to grow, that might be counterproductive. That's the only thought that jumps out at me.
Well, I also felt like if we're updating our rainfalls and we're getting more rainfall, then I don't know, is the 72 hours just need to be updated, because you can no longer feasibly.
Mosquito gestation time involved in this. I'm just trying to figure out why 72 hours.
3 days. Plant life.
That's what it's kind of based on.
And killing grasses and stuff.
That's what I thought it was. Is,
Related to vegetation?
the grass can only survive that long without oxygen.
You're talking turf grass now, right?
Okay, so maybe we'll have a little bit of a deeper discussion on that. Maybe we need to be more mindful on the design side of what they're proposing and
Al, just out of curiosity, what makes it hard to hit the 72 hours?
A lot of the sites were building depressions in the ground. Now we're relying on the release rate of the soil. That's
Okay.
low.
So it's an infiltration.
It's infiltration
Okay,
kills it,
yeah.
is one of them. And you get these little restrictors that are an inch, inch and a half diameter, and
So what we see is people that have a tough time hitting this is they have an infiltration basin, and they're trying to squeeze that basin to as small footprint as possible, so then it's getting vertically more water, so they've got like 6 to 8 feet of bounce, and then the release rate out of it is driven by the square foot of area of the bottom times that infiltration rate. And so that's where we see people.
our problem is our head is only 3 or 4 feet. these are small flat
Yeah,
sites. and
Right, I was gonna say, because they're flat.
There's just not a lot of head
you
on
get a
these
lot of head
little
on them.
pipes.
I imagine you get any kind of buildup on a small restrictor too, is gonna have a huge impact on that low head.
Yeah.
Just trying to get that last little bit out.
Right. Yeah, and then
Yeah,
also
it's a huge lag at that tail end.
it's a function of the infiltration rate is the rate of infiltration times the area that you have. And so the more you squeeze that area down,
Well-
the lower that rate is.
A lot of our baser bottoms we're putting in, bringing in soil that's pervious
Yeah.
to get the bottom to drain. We're doing one right at Queen Anne Road right now.
Since this seems like it's more vegetation driven, maybe we need
Right.
to reword this to coincide.
We're already doing flat bottoms in most of our, these detention basins already, that are wetland type.
All right, well,
pervious.
let staff work on that then, considering the vegetation input. I didn't realize that was the main driver, that makes sense. We'll maybe try to come up with
Can I just bring up
Yeah.
an idea for, because I'm not a botanist. I feel like the wetland component is misconstrued a little bit. So if you have a wetland bottom basin, over time, maybe it's not even over time, I don't really feel like that equates to infiltration. Rather, wetland spring, that basically caps the bottom of your basin.
It's a perched.
Right? So it doesn't encourage infiltration. It encourages evapotranspiration.
Yeah.
Like a basin that's intended to infiltrate is a basin that's usually got a gravel bottom with it, maybe has an underdrain. So I think maybe the two are not really meeting a definition of clarity here. I don't know.
Well, you also have to take into account the side slopes, but,
Well, let's just try to leave that out for now. Because I keep getting that, I keep hearing that, you know, a wetland basin does function A, but it really doesn't do function A. It's intended to trap constituent material, and that constituent material further seals the bottom, right? It makes that kind of that film on the bottom.
I have denied designs trying to promote infiltration with wetland. I have. And unless you gave me an analysis that showed you can achieve infiltration through that wetland
Well,
design.
your infiltration is deliberately drying out the bottom of the basin, which is counterintuitive to wetland species.
No, I'm
growth,
just
right?
saying, I've seen that proposed, but it has confused me as well. I've never looked at it. I've had one or two that I can think of that I was like, this, unless you can give me like a wetland specialist geotechnical report.
they're claiming infiltration.
They were indicating infiltration, but then saying wetland bottom. And I was like, those two to me don't go hand in hand unless you can give me some kind of study, including geotech. And that's how I bring it back, because I'm like, I don't know what that means. But unless a geotech and like a wetland consultant or someone indicates like, yes, this mix of dirt and plant vegetation and everything is going to allow you to do that, then I have seen that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's their intent or just the engineers just, okay,
Yeah,
infiltration and we'll just some wetland
It
plants.
sounds like more bad design.
I don't know. I don't know. And usually that's been for infiltration, and that's kind of how I've instructed these guys to review it, is ask for the boring samples and have a geotech confirm that they can leave it as is, or if they're replacing, figure out what that new material is and make sure that there's a sign off on it. And yeah, the two that I've permitted, they're gravel bottoms. Yours is one on Queen Anne.
Well, the one at Queen Anne did have, it was very poor drainage soil. We had the separation of seasonal groundwater.
Yeah, you had to replace like.
But we had to replace like a 50 by 50 area with permeable soils.
Right.
So we had to go down, whatever, they're working on it right now.
I told you, make sure you have a geotech present. Because I
And
don't
we
know.
call that a wet prairie mix bottom. Call what you
Right,
want.
but you
Sandy
had-
soils in some areas there, but,
You had kind of a vegetated area upstream or kind of.
right, and another sediment basin in front of it. Yeah.
Right. So yes, so that was, it's not but there have been some that are fully gravel bottoms with then side slopes.
Well, it's beautiful when you have the gravel bottoms.
But anyway, well, one was next to a gravel pit, so.
What about native vegetated areas? Are those considered infiltration? basins or infiltration strips or whatever?
Mike, I'll be honest with you, if someone says I'm doing infiltration, but they're proposing some kind of native vegetation or plantings, I would ask that question of, okay, what does your design look like? Because if you're doing vegetation, to me, at some point, you're probably putting some kind of mix on top, right, to promote the growth. I don't see how you're not clogging anything you might have underneath. Unless, and this was something that I spoke with the geotech before, and he said there are some compost mixes where you can achieve infiltration, but they are specific. So unless it's designed for it, I say sure, show me the details and how it works. Just like a permeable paver, show me the details of the permeable paver and show me the subgrade. I am not opposed to it, and the reason why I say that is I don't know all the designs out there, and again, we're encouraging flexibility, so. All right. Thank you, Brian, for that. We'll side table that one or top. And we did approve our post-construction best management practices to include some of these features, but again, they're tailored off a lot of the SWCD design criteria and everything. So if someone is promoting that type of design, I would, when you're reviewing it, just ask for those details. All right, let's try to get this wrapped up, or at least get your input to see if I'm close on this or what far apart. Some deletions here about the applicant doing notifications. And then, so the idea is that staff would do that, just to make sure that the information is actually going out and it's the correct information. So that's why those are removed. The concentrated discharges section I have removed and I've incorporated further down. So concentrated discharge from a development site shall demonstrate that adequate downstream stormwater capacity can be achieved. Then talks about, okay, if you can't achieve it, use the outfall, right? Or if land damage to an agricultural swale may occur, or structural damage to an existing drain tile may occur, you're doing that the outfall. So now comes the fun part. I decided that as part of the outfall design, so this next section talks about the outfall design, where you need to evaluate it to. I added a hierarchy, and I'll let you know why, but the hierarchy would be you're trying to do infiltration basin, which at that point you have no release from your site, right? Everything's going into the ground, so downstream adequate capacity is met. You're basically releasing zero to the other site, except maybe in emergency overflow situations, all of that criteria still remains. Separate storm pipe would be the next one, overland ditch or swale, and then number 4, connection to an existing drain tile. So the idea is with this hierarchy, what can happen is the engineer does the design, we send it out, we provide a 30-day open comment period to send feedback from that owners. We then provide that input back to the engineer to revise the designs. And again, the 30-day window is just based on a lot of, like, when you go into IDNR permitting, a lot of our zoning stuff, a lot of stuff is 30 days, so just trying to be kind of consistent with that. You make the final changes, you send it back out, and give them 30 days to basically say yes or no to this design. So if they say no, or from the get-go they're not responsive, the hierarchy is supposed to help in kind of, we don't want the engineer to just tie into an existing as part of it. So that's the idea behind the hierarchy, is if you don't get any cooperation from those downstream property owners, or they say no, you kind of try to see, is number 1 feasible, is number 2 feasible, and so on and so forth. So then you go through that whole process. You're either in agreement or you're not. There's a design in place, and we can talk about that hierarchy and some of the specifics about the design. But just kind of moving through here, you then get to the point where it's gonna be located on private property, right? So I tried to modify this to say that you're gonna need a deed, a plat restriction, or some kind of drainage easement agreement, and that the deed, plat restriction, or drainage easement agreement language shall be clearly defined. And I think someone, Ernest, you brought up adequate access previously when we were talking about this stuff, so I've added it in here to be specific. So that's the agreement portion, so that it could be up to those property owners to figure out how they want to, do that piece. And then what would happen in D is essentially we would issue a permit for all of the work based on all the feedback and everything. And then the outfall improvement portion would be a condition that would only move forward if the downstream owner fills out form or has that agreement and completes that and gives it back to us. Then basically that upstream owner would move forward with payment. So I put the 2 years there of permit issuance, so that that person can't come in like the last 2 months of the permit if it's been a 3-year process to say, oh yeah, you know what, I want it. So they have the 2 years, but it's from the permit issuance. So this was kind of the way it came together to try to knock this section out. The biggest change is obviously permitting everything, having that downstream owner be the one responsible to say yes or no, so nobody's hunting them down. And then the hierarchy component of it, so that there's some level to the design. Now, one thing in the hierarchy that it doesn't talk about is like for a separate pipe, obviously, are you running that through the middle of the property, through the outsides or something like that? So we could add some language to try to like minimize, I didn't want to put shortest path because that could, not be, but so some additional things we can work on there. But anyway, this is what it looks like. So,
Do you define downstream property owners? So where do you start, where do you stop? So like zoning, it's contiguous parcel or adjacent parcel owners, right? But in theory, like that one that we're working on down on 176,
yeah.
the outlet's down south of conservation.
That's a good,
So-
800 acres there.
There's 400 acres between the site and the
Yeah.
outlet, but
That's kind of, well, we can look at that, but it's supposed to be defined in point A of where your evaluation takes place. So once you establish your evaluation, you know how many properties, so anything within that evaluation line or area is what it would be like. And I know that was also like channel, defining channel or whatever. We look at it as, for that one specifically, I opened up the historical and like, right now, you can see that there's a ditch, but when you look at it 5 years, 6 years, that ditch
It all
was not
dumps along
really
the road.
defined. So we couldn't say that, hey, this is,
Right.
so that's why we were requiring that with UL. Otherwise, you probably could have just given us a capacity analysis for that, be done with it, but, so that's what we're supposed to do.
But that way, because otherwise the problem that'll come in is, well, I'm 280s away from that project, but now I'm still taking on their water, and now I'm at a U. Because I technically should maybe be a downstream property owner, and I'm taking their water.
Which is fine, and I think our argument to that is that's what the analysis is supposed to show, is that you're not taking any more, right?
Yeah.
You're not taking any more than you're supposed to. And you know what, even if that's perfect, I'll still deal with that.
But you know what I mean, just trying to maybe as many of those as possible, but.
No, I would love to, like, with this language, get to like 100% no headaches. That's never gonna happen. So if we're at, I always tell you guys, I don't know, 90, 80%, whatever it is, as high as possible, and that's the best we can do, then I'll take it. And, so, but anyway, this is kind of the order. I haven't coordinated this with the state's attorney. I have been working with one of the attorneys over there that has been closely involved with a lot of this. So I do have to send this over because they did have some good input. Any fine tuning from the group here, I guess I'll open it up to discussion. Like I said, the main idea is the hierarchy and the idea of moving away from the bond, just issuing it and having a request form, which obviously we have to create, make sure that that's all up to snuff. But if it looks like we're on the right track, I'll get some more eyes on this and bring it back one final time. I was just, the hierarchy was the one where I wasn't sure what you guys would think about that, but.
What is, it mentions structural damage of an existing drain tile. What is that? That means you're pushing too much water down it and it's going to?
That's what I assume. It
Yeah.
just breaks
Okay.
the clay. So like there's been times where I have not allowed tension within existing drain tiles because I'm afraid of that head that's gonna cause damage somewhere along the system.
The example for that farmer in particular is that tile's 4 to 6 feet down under the ground. Along this 2,000-foot stretch to the ditch nearby, there could be potholes in the surface that the pipe, I don't think it's clay tile anymore. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
if it gets a hole, next thing you know, it's got damage from the farmer itself instead of us.
And it looks like it's DOT road there, and part of the note from the investigation was that there's like a break or disconnect. So that could also, God, I don't want to deal with DOT. MCDOT or IDOT or townships that messed up their,
And that's
messed up
township
their
that it's
road.
going to.
Yeah.
So is that synonymous with having your release from your site exceeding the capacity of the tile? Is that?
Yeah, so so basically it would, that would be the analysis there, or Darren, kind of wherever that point is that you're gonna be connecting in, you're taking a look at what's flowing to it and is your capacity, and then, theoretically, you would look at all kind of downstream portions of it just to see what's flowing to it, but, so in this case, it's not a direct connection either. It's surface draining to kind of a little bit of a perforated riser area that can get in as well, just to eliminate that head issue potentially.
And are direct connections to a drain tile allowed through this anywhere?
I'm pretty sure the original language in here did say it.
Yeah, we had to evaluate the existing tile first as part of our study on this property. Proved that it did. We found a method to do it.
So connect concentrated discharges from a development site shall be connected to an existing drain tile where possible. I didn't carry that over, I just talked about concentrated discharges. Shall demonstrate that there's adequate downstream capacity. I'm not necessarily saying that we want them connected where possible, because a lot of this drain tile is old, probably end up causing more issues than solving. So I did so that whole original IX, I struck the whole thing and just did a simplified sentence there really to drive the point across. And that's why I put, in the hierarchy, I put that fourth as a last means effort. And so this way, if there is coordination with the downstream owner, if that's what they would want, then that's fine, because then that's getting their input. But if you don't have their input, a lot of the times from what I understand from ag community folks or just drain tile installers, that you do not want to necessarily do that. And also, what they say is like, I don't even want to mess with the old one, I'm just gonna put a new pipe right next to it. The only reason we didn't in this case is there's a lot of laterals potentially to deal with, and so replacing the existing was probably gonna be the most feasible in that. So if you're doing a separate pipe, then you're just, again, 4-inch, 6-inch, whatever for your detention release. If you're not, then that's kind of why the hierarchy is intended to push you away from the existing connection. Infiltration being the best, you're not sending anything down stream theoretically. And it goes along the lines of promoting infiltration in groundwater and all that. so.
I heard you made it happen.
Okay, well, this doesn't sound like there's any more input, so I'll keep it for now. And that will close out all of our discussion items. So with that, there's really no new business, reports, future topics, any announcements anyone wants to make, any future topic, you want to make an announcement?
Yep.
Okay.
So I know a lot of you have already signed up, but our last in our battery of events this spring, we're having MS4 program that we're doing in collaboration with Lake County. We don't have a budget to do a lot of, specific MS4 things, but we can provide training. And so our main speaker is going to be from the IEPA, and he's going to be focusing on the audit process for MS4s. All of us are going to be audited, all of us involved in MS4s are going to be audited at some point, so what is the process? So I think this really will be a very enlightening program. And then we'll also be having Dan Bounds provide a presentation. We're having him focus heavily on providing examples of pollution prevention for municipal facilities. So not just regurgitating regulatory babble, but actually providing very specific, tangible examples of pollution prevention practices that can and should be being implemented in our municipalities. I'll provide a brief overview of the MS4 process, and then we'll be providing 2 case studies that Lake and McHenry County DOTs have implemented to reduce chloride pollution. So I think we've got a very well-rounded program, and this is something municipalities can get credit for their annual training. And the idea is that we'll do this on an annual basis, focusing on pollution prevention and other components of the MS4 program. And this allows us, kind of an economy of scale. Instead of all of us doing, repeating the same thing, we're able to combine forces. Most of the consultants in Lake County are also the same ones working in McHenry County, so there's a lot of overlap already. So it's May 21st from 8:30 to noon. It's a free program, and I'd like to see McHenry County as strongly represented as possible. I got flyers here with the agenda, so I know a lot of people have already signed up, but if you're not signed up or you want more information, grab a flyer. That's all I got.
It's a hybrid event.
What's that?
It's hybrid.
Yeah, it's a great point. So it's a hybrid event, and so we have up for 75 people in-house. I think we've got over 50 people so far, and then Zoom is unlimited. We will have light breakfast and snacks for those of you who are coming in person.
And have they made any more comments about when the new permit would be?
Great point. I mentioned that. So it was going to be May 1st and June 1st. Now we're hearing July 1st.
Okay.
What's
So-
the for? It was July 1st, 2023, then 2024, now 2025. So hopefully we see it. But the IEPA spokesperson will bring that up. Todd Bennett, I don't know if anybody knows him, but it should be a great program. And once again, this is something we'd like to do annually, so we really want strong turnout and really want strong representation from McHenry County. Thanks.
One last thing for you guys, because the main thing that you had was the release rate component. I would propose to cancel the June 10th meeting to give us a chance to have a lot of that and come back for July 8th.
I make a motion to cancel the June meeting.
Okay.
Second.
Made by Mike Warner. Second by Darren. All right, do I hear any discussion? Okay, we'll move to a vote. So this would be canceling the June 10th meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. All right, move to adjournment
So moved.
by Darren.
Second.
Second by Brian. All in favor? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Brian, is those contacts I sent you, were you able to reach?
Brian Fleming called me.
What's that?
Brian Fleming called me. Just hanging out. Do you know him?
Good work.
It's up on,
A lot of people said-
it's up a little higher on